Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Nothing can get you going like your Morning Pitt right here in the morning. All the Pitt sports talk that you need and news and updates and everything you need really to kind of get started on your day with Pitt stuff. And we have it all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You can see it right down there around the yellow.com. There's a little blue rectangle. You hit that subscribe button, and that's going to, first of all, get you subscribed to our YouTube channel, which we appreciate. YouTube likes it when they see those kind of subscriber numbers go up, so that helps us out if you do it. Plus, that gives you the opportunity to turn on the notifications so you can get an alert every time we go live or post a new Morning Pitt video. You'll never miss anything that we do. You know, we have our pretty regularly scheduled live Panther-Lair show. We do it every Wednesday night. That'll be tonight at 8:30, and you can pretty much count on that. Sometimes it's 8:31, 8:32, but you can pretty much rely on it. And then we have our post-game shows. And those, you know, who knows what time those start. You know, the Rhode Island game was a noon game. We started the post-game show at 8:30 because I had some things to do after the game. This week's game, Georgia Tech, is an 8 o'clock kickoff at Acrisure Stadium. We'll have a live show after that game, but I don't know what time we'll be live. It'll be somewhere after the game. I'm guessing 1 or 2 in the morning, somewhere around there. 1:30 in the morning. Who knows? But you don't have to worry about it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications. You will always know when we go live. You'll get an alert sent to your phone. So that's kind of the best way to stay on top of everything we're doing here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We post a new video or put some new content out on YouTube, which we did a lot this week. We've done a lot so far. In addition to our Morning Pitt videos, you'll know when those videos go live. You get the notification sent to your phone. So do that, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and then, of course, go check out Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. All Panther-Lair.com, and, of course, message boards where you can get the latest, the Pitt conversations with lots of other Pitt fans. Everything that you are probably thinking about with Pitt sports, there are probably other Pitt fans having a conversation about that very topic right now on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So go check that out for all the discussion. And I mean, obviously, so much of the focus is on football right now. Pitt is 3-1, heading toward the ACC opener against Georgia Tech, a team that appears to be reeling after firing its head coach. And you know, we've talked about that game the last couple of days. We're certainly going to talk about it a lot more in the next couple of days coming up here leading into Saturday. But there was also some basketball stuff because first official practice of the season was on Monday for Jeff Capel and his crew, and then Capel and Jamarius Burton and Greg Elliott, the transfer guard from Marquette, and John Hughley all met the media after the practice just to kind of preview the 2022-2023 season. And so while I've been thinking a lot about football and recruiting and focusing on what Pitt needs to do to beat Georgia Tech, also had some basketball on the brain. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me, and it's not something that I just realized on Monday, it's something I thought about all summer as they, and really throughout the offseason as Jeff Capel set out to sort of rebuild this roster. He had room to add as many as 8 guys. They ended up adding 7. They tried to add 8 and lost a guy late in the process due to some personal issues. But the biggest thing throughout the offseason and throughout the summer, and then certainly, again, I was reminded of it and started thinking a lot about it on Monday after talking to Jeff Capel, is just Capel's approach to this season. And look, we've seen Jeff Capel try a lot of things over the last 4 years. You know, those first couple of years, it was really built around Dior Johnson and Trey McGowan's and Audice Toney being really good and being sort of the keys to the whole thing. You know, I mean, they were brought in as star-studded freshmen, brought in to be impact freshmen, and largely they were impact freshmen. Well, that team had some issues too, and it was an inherited roster, or at least what remained of an inherited roster for Jeff Capel, that he tried to really kind of bolster with these 3 freshmen with mixed results. The next year, he tries to build around those 3 guys, the 1920 season. He tries to build around those guys, and he adds, Justin Champagnie and tries to bring in a transfer or 2 to sort of supplement things, and it just doesn't click. It just doesn't work. Champagnie emerges as a star, probably somewhat to a few of his teammates' chagrin, and it just doesn't quite come together. And there seems to be internal issues and internal friction, and it carries over to the court, and the results are, not an improvement over the previous season. For the most part, I mean, you can find some ways to kind of turn the numbers into an improvement, but I mean, for the most part, it wasn't an improvement. He goes into year 3. Champagny is the clear star of the team. That maybe doesn't necessarily sit well with some of the other former stars of the team. One is already gone. Trey McGowens is already transferred by this point. By the end of the season, Xavier Johnson and Audice Toney would be gone as well. This is the COVID year, so everything's kind of upside down as it is. And whatever plan there was ran into some significant trouble when one guy's getting all the attention, and and rightfully so, as Justin Champagny averaged a double-double that year, had a bunch of 2020 games. He earned the attention he was getting, and maybe that didn't necessarily sit well with some of his teammates who had previously gotten some of that attention. And again, locker room issues boil over, and compounded by just sort of the crazy nature of that year of 2020 into the spring of 2021, and you get a season that, by all accounts, seems even worse than it had been. And so you roll into last season, and the approach sort of changes. I mean, Johnson, Toney, McGowens was already gone. Johnson and Toney are gone. Champagny leaves for the NBA. And midway through that COVID season, John Hughley runs into his legal issues and is lost for the year. And so you come into last season, and there's sort of a different approach. The team is built around Hughley. The team is built to kind of operate with him as the centerpiece of the offense, a distributing point guard in Femi Odikale, an outside threat in Ethiel Horton, Jamarius Burton brought in to sort of supplement things, Nike Sabandi coming back, and maybe the team develops in a certain way, and there's an approach. There's a newfound or re-centered approach on defense, on toughness, on trying to just drag teams down to the muck, right? I mean, that's what they said all year long, and this was the mantra heading into it, that this is how they were going to play. It wasn't going to be about relying on star guards to lead the way. This was going to be a down and dirty Pitt team that I think, in the coach's hopes and imaginations, would somewhat resemble the successful Pitt teams of the past. Well, it was a good idea, or at least it seemed to make sense in theory. But in practice, what ended up happening was one of the central tenets of those Pitt teams of the past, of everyone doing their job and staying in their role in the better service of the team and the team goals, kind of fell to the wayside. People started doing their own thing, tried to do too much or do things outside of their sort of job and their role, and it tanked the whole thing once again. And so I think through those first 4 years, you see varying approaches and adjustments made, and different styles and different approaches and different ways of trying to construct the roster, or different ways of trying to find whatever key it is, whatever magical formula it is to succeed in the ACC. And so you enter year 5. Capel's got 8 spots to fill, after transfers and departures and this and that, and he ends up filling them all. And then, like I say, he loses Cassius McNeely late in the summer. So it's 7 guys in, and the approach, I think, in the way that Capel went about building this roster, which I think is an indication of what he wants this team to be, is very interesting, because it's not necessarily a situation that they've had before. It's not necessarily the kind of roster they've had before, and who knows? It just might work. What is the approach this year? What are they trying to do? I mean, first of all, they still want to drag teams down to the muck. They still want to get, dirty and physical, and not play dirty in terms of cheap shots, but play that kind of grinding game. Even if they have more depth, I don't know if they necessarily want to be an up-tempo team. I think they want to, again, drag teams down to the muck, that same sort of mantra from last season. But they're going to take a different approach to it this year. And for starters, one of the biggest things that you see with this roster, one of the biggest things that Capel added, is experienced guards. You already have Jamarius Burton and Nike Sabandi coming back, and those are both guys who are veteran players who have been around a long time, played more than 100 games each, and they're both, I think 22 or 23 years old. And then you've got transfers coming in the form of Nelly Cummings from Colgate and Greg Elliott from Marquette. Both of those guys are 23 years old, and they'll be 24 before you get to February 1st. So these are old college basketball players. They're not young guys at all, and they're not inexperienced. They've all played 100+ games in their careers at multiple schools. Elliott, Marquette, and then transferring to Pitt. Nelly Cummings at Bowling Green, transferring to Colgate, now transferring to Pitt. Nike Sabandi at Miami of Ohio, transferring to Pitt. Jamarius Burton at Wichita State, transferring to Texas Tech, transferring to Pitt. 100+ games in a variety of places, playing a variety of ways, and now all 22, 23, and almost 24 years old, having had varying degrees of success in their college careers. Nelly Cummings has played in 2 NCAA tournament games, one each of the last 2 years. He averaged 17 points per game in those 2 games. And he was also on the Colgate squad that made the NCAA tournament, I think, 2 years prior to that. But he couldn't play because he had just transferred from Bowling Green, and the 1-year transfer rule hadn't gone into place yet. But he's got experience being in that environment and playing and succeeding at that higher level. Greg Elliott has been in the postseason at Marquette, both in the NCAA tournament and the NIT. Jamarius Burton has been in the postseason with Wichita State and Texas Tech. These guys have experience. These guys have experience succeeding. These guys have experience working together, working with other guards and playing, because they all, to varying degrees, had played significant roles for their teams, whether it was Marquette or Bowling Green or Colgate or Wichita State or Texas Tech or Miami of Ohio. They all played a lot, and they played significant roles and had to understand about how to work with other players, how to understand about leadership, how to understand about how to operate on the court, that it's not just about you, that there are team goals to achieve and team goals to go after. And Jeff Capel has never had a backcourt with this much experience. Xavier Johnson and Trey McGowan were freshmen and sophomores. You know what I mean? By the time McGowan's left, and then Johnson was a junior. But Femi Odikale is backing him up as a freshman last year. Femi Odikale is the starting point guard, and he's a sophomore. Well, this year's starting point guard is going to be a 6th-year senior in Nelly Cummings, the guy who's going to turn 24 before the end of the calendar year, and has played 100+ games, and has played in the NCAA tournament and had success in the NCAA tournament. Individual success. It's a different approach, and it's not necessarily something you're going to be able to replicate every year, but for this year, Capel just was able to put together a very experienced backcourt to lead this team. And I really think there were two main objectives for Capel and his staff this offseason. One was getting an experienced backcourt, and 2 was improving the shooting, because I think all too often the coaches felt like it was easy for opponents to tee off on John Hughley, the team's best weapon, the team's most potent scorer, the key to all of Pitt's success last season. It was too easy to almost shut him down because there was no threat of outside scoring. Pitt was 13th out of 15 teams in the ACC last year in three-point shooting. Pitt was dead last in the conference in three-pointers made, and they were next to last in three-pointers attempted. So it wasn't even like they were a poor shooting team. They didn't even try. There was no threat from outside. And when there was no threat from outside, you can do the math on this one, right? There's no threat from outside, and the center is the biggest threat, is the biggest weapon that this team has. You don't have to think very hard to figure that out. You crash down on John Hughley, and you can pretty much shut Pitt down. If there's a little bit of a threat from outside, if there's someone out there who can make a few shots, it's going to open things up for Hughley considerably. And if you can open things up for John Hughley, if you can get more opportunity for him, then things start getting really interesting about what this team can do and how competitive they can be. What did they find in terms of shooters? Elliott is the main addition. Greg Elliott coming in from Marquette, career 41% three-point shooter. Had a couple seasons over 40%. The other seasons were right around 38, 39%. That's what you need. Now, he hasn't had a ton of volume, but if you can get him shooting often and making somewhere in that 38 to 41, 42% range, now you've got a legitimate threat that somebody on the other team has to account for and be prepared for. I think Nelly Cummings can make a few shots from outside. I think Jamarius Burton is dangerous enough from the outside. I think Nike Sabandi, when he gets back, can just be a threat. If Nate Santos is ready to play more. Three-point shooting is his calling card. Just to be a threat. Jeff Capel even mentioned Blake Hinson, the transfer who came from Ole Miss, sort of played at Ole Miss, and then kind of went to Iowa State, never played, and now at Pitt. But he's a forward who can shoot a little bit, even if he hasn't played in about 2 years. He can still shoot decently from that forward position. The twins, Guillermo and Jorge Diaz-Graham, can shoot. They're big, tall European basketball players who have that skill set that I think you associate with European basketball. And so if there's just a little, this doesn't need to be a team full of sharpshooters, but if there's just a little bit of a threat, it can draw some of that attention away from Hughley and maybe give him more room to operate and potentially give this team a chance for more success. And so to me, that's what this season comes down to. It comes down to these two components that Pitt hasn't really had or hasn't really been able to rely on, of veteran guards and shooting. And I mean, they absolutely accounted for the veteran guards. They have the veteran guards. You can see the age. You can see that Nelly Cummings has been around forever, and Greg Elliott's been around forever, and Jamarius Burton and Nike Sabandi have been around forever. You can see that. You can see how old those guys are, how many games they've played, and you can say, okay, they've got veteran guards who can work together in the backcourt. The shooting is a little bit tougher to predict. Like I said, Greg Elliott is a career 41% three-point shooter, not a ton of volume. How does that translate to playing in the ACC over the course of a full season and shooting, who knows how much, however many shots he's going to need to put up? That's a little bit more on the remains to be seen side. And the wild card in all of it, and he's not necessarily a shooter, but he could be an impact player and a game changer, is Dior Johnson, the freshman who came in, who, as Jeff Capel described it, fell into Pitt's lap. And I kind of use that phrase every now and then over the last few months since Dior Johnson ended up committing to and signing with Pitt. But I didn't want to be flip about it, but that's sort of how it looked from the outside. And Jeff Capel, unprovoked, said that he fell into their laps. It just kind of happened. And fortunate for Capel that it did, because now he's got arguably the most talented guard he has ever recruited. He looks like a higher end prospect than Xavier Johnson or Trey McGowan's, and that's not to knock on those guys. I think it's just about how good Dior Johnson is and how good he can be. And I think you end up with what could potentially be a really ideal setup, where you've got this super talented freshman who's going to come in and want to play right away and make a big impact. And then you've got this sort of umbrella of 4 really experienced guards, 4 guys who have played 100+ games, who can be there to help him and to mentor him. And you'd like to think are mature enough not to be threatened by him, that they understand they could play with him, or they could play, they could play next to him or play ahead of him or play behind him. But either way, if they understand that guiding him and mentoring him and leading him will help Pitt be the best it can be and lead to the most team success, then there's a chance for a really good setup there, I think, and a really good situation where Jeff Capel probably wanted to bring in veteran guards because they just needed guards. When Femi Odekale left, Ethiel Horton left, they needed some guards. They couldn't just have Jamarius Burton and Nike Sabandi. They needed guys. And going to get veteran guys, I mean, it's one thing to go get a sophomore guard or even a junior guard, but to get 2 redshirt super senior guards like Nelly Cummings and Greg Elliott, now you've added a whole lot to your team in terms of experience, in terms of ideally maturity and leadership, and what they can impart to a young player like Dior Johnson. I'm fascinated by this season. I'm fascinated because we haven't seen this sort of Pitt team under Capel yet. We haven't seen them put together this way, where, you've got this veteran backcourt, you've got the potential for shooting, and then you've got, a star player in John Hughley with, potentially some other star players to break out. And I think Nelly Cummings can be really good. I think the key players for Pitt this season, I know I talked a lot about shooting and all this. I think the guys who are really going to make this go are Nelly Cummings, Dior Johnson, and John Hughley. I think those are the 3 guys who can fill key roles, who can have the biggest upside. Maybe Greg Elliott plays with them as a third guard to give a shooting threat from outside, and Blake Hinson maybe shoots as well. We'll see how the twins develop. We'll see if Federico can play. And obviously Jamarius Burton and Nike Sabandi are going to be in there as well, providing crucial, help for this team, in a variety of roles. But I think Cummings, Johnson, Hughley is your big 3. And I'm putting a lot on the freshmen. I'm putting a lot on Dior Johnson to come in and be great. But that's college basketball these days. If you have a high-profile recruit like that coming in, if you have a high-profile freshman, the expectations are going to be high for him. They really are. And so, like I say, I'm really fascinated by this season because I'm curious to see how this approach goes. They haven't had a team like this. We haven't seen Jeff Capel approach an offseason like this or bring in the types of players that he brought in this offseason or have the kind of success in recruiting high school and transfers that he had this year to kind of build a team this way. We'll find out what the shooting is. He says on paper they should be a better shooting team than they've been. He also feels like this is maybe his most talented team. And I think there's probably some truth to that. I think, with Hughley leading the charge and then these veteran guards behind him and Dior Johnson joining in and then really intriguing twins, the Diaz-Graham twins, I think this has a chance to be his most talented team. Translating that into wins and translating that into more success than they've had in the past 4 seasons is going to be about how much the team buys in, how much the individual players buy into the team goals and what each individual player's part is in achieving those team goals. And I think there's where, again, it comes back to some of the leadership. It comes back to some of these veteran guards. That was really interesting when we talk about leadership and focusing on team goals. Jeff Capel talked on Monday about John Hughley, Jamarius Burton, and Nike Sabandi. Pretty much as soon as the offseason started, diving into recruiting and maybe not finding all the high school guys they could find, but constantly monitoring transfers and finding new transfers and, constantly texting Jeff Capel, hey, coach, I talked to this guy. He might be interested in Pitt. Or, hey, coach, we should look at this guy, or we need to find out about this guy, or this guy could help us. Trying to be little GMs or something, trying to help build the team. And not because they want to mold it around them. This isn't something like that, like an NBA thing, but because they want Pitt to be better. They want to have success. Burton and Sabandi and Hughley are here. They're committed to being at Pitt. And then they knew there was a lot of roster spots to fill, and they wanted to do their part to help fill them. And, their involvement in not just finding transfers and recruiting targets, but in working on guys like Nelly Cummings or Greg Elliott or Dior Johnson, or Blake Hinson, I think it was huge. And I think it's huge in helping to get those players to Pitt, but I think it's also huge for what it says about their commitment to the team and the tone that they're setting. I think if you're Nelly Cummings and you're talking to John Hughley and you're talking to Jamarius Burton, 2 veteran players on a Pitt team, who 2 guys who are expecting to be some of the top guys, the top players on this team, and they're telling you how much you can come in and help them and how they need a player like you, I think that not only makes you feel good about yourself, and I'm sure it does, but it, I think, helps set a tone for how the players are approaching this season and what the expectations are in terms of commitment to the team and buy-in to the team. So when you've got all these veteran guards and you've got John Hughley, who's a junior, you should have the leadership in place to set the right tones. I guess is probably the best way to say it. To set the expectation, the understanding that you are expected to come in and do your job and play for the team and help the team achieve its goals. Like I say, we haven't seen a team like this before from Capel. And, who knows how many more opportunities he's going to get. We'll see what it looks like at the end of the season to figure that out, to figure out how many more opportunities there are. But I think if you're in a situation where you need to win now, and I think it'd probably be in Jeff Capel's best interest to do so, this seems like a sound way to build the team. With these veterans and, if all works out, a reemphasis or improved shooters on the outside to help John Hughley get freed up and do what he does. And he should have a big season. He should have a monster season this year. He should be one of the best players in the ACC, regardless of position. But he's going to need his teammates to help him out. All right. Little digression into basketball today. We'll be back into football tomorrow. We're going to recap the month of September, talk about some recruiting stuff, and then really turn our focus to this game against Georgia Tech as Pitt opens the ACC schedule on Saturday. 8 p.m. kickoff at Acrisure Stadium. We're going to talk about everything you need to know going into that game, plus looking at games all over the country, games in the top 25 to keep an eye on, games in the Coastal Division to keep an eye on. There's a lot going on this weekend and the next 2 days. The morning pits are going to be full of football talk, but I thought we could take today, talk just a little bit of hoops, even though we still have the football slideshow playing there. I don't have enough basketball photos from this year yet to make it an all hoops slideshow, but we'll get that going. Listen, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and turn on the notifications. That way you'll always get an alert every time we go live and every time we release a new Morning Pit video every morning, Monday through Friday. And it's all part of our coverage at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. All at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So check out the website and get in the conversation with other Pitt fans. We'll be live tonight for the Panther-Lair Show, 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then we'll be back with you again tomorrow morning, Thursday morning, for the Thursday edition of the Morning Pit, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.